Yeah, I feel that as I'm looked at, analysed and scrutinised as a male role model. It's quite nice to hear it sometimes. You know, I've met parents who have said, you've completely changed my son's life by him watching Suicide and Me. He tried to take his own life. I've had dads reach out and say, seeing the effect on you, which was, this I thought was strange because it wasn't the effect it had on his own kids, but maybe he was too close to see it. But he had tried to take his own life before, and he said after seeing the effect it's had on you, finding out the details of why your dad did what you did, or as close to as why your dad did what you did, I'd never try and take my life again. And hearing messages like that, that's a positive aspect of it. But when someone's criticising you because you put a picture up of you with a fag in your mouth on Instagram, you know, you're encouraging smoking. I'm not. I'm making a cigarette. I was always smart enough to make my own decisions. Stupid enough to make the wrong ones sometimes, but that's part of growing up. I think people don't like to take responsibility for themselves or in a lot of instances, their children anymore. There's a lot of wiping hands of responsibility, and all of a sudden, I'm responsible for your children. I'm responsible for their behaviour. I'm responsible for whether or not they should know right or wrong, which is fucking ridiculous. How can I be responsible? I haven't even got a kid myself. Why? Because I'm too irresponsible. Yeah. So growing up for me, my role models really were my nan, but she wasn't there much. People always say, you know, you were brought up by your nan. I wasn't. She provided. So in single-parent families, which wasn't my situation was far more fractured than that, but in single-parent families, what often goes missing is the time and care that should be put into bringing a child up and working to provide for that child, which you can see why either would cause a problem, because if you don't work, you don't have money, there are things you go without, but if you go without love, when you're born, as a kid, you don't want things. You need intimacy, you need connection, you need love, but you miss out on those things if your parents having to work to provide you because they've been left in a situation where they're on their own. So in my family, my role models are my nan, although she wasn't there much because she was working 2 jobs a day. She would get picked up at 4 o'clock in the morning by a governor, go and clean the banks, come back, go and work a job at Percy Ingles, and then go and clean the houses of mostly the Jewish in Stamford Hill. So the people that I saw more were Mark, my uncle, and my great-grandmother, Nanny Edith, but she was always Nanny Edie to me. And she had lived through 2 world wars, 1 World Cup. And yeah, had a metal plate in her leg, diabetes, 2 strokes, and never complained up until the day that she passed away. And she passed away when I was 13, which during the filming of one of the documentaries, I spoke to a psychologist, and she was like, wait a minute, but your great-grandmother passed when you were 13? And I was like, yeah. And she was like, you told me that was when you started smoking weed more heavily. And that was when you fell out of school, and that was when you ended up in a pupil referral unit. And these are all things which you go tick, tick, tick. And you're like, oh, I'm in my 30s, surely I've worked this out by now. Because you think you've got everything worked out, but you realise you're just a work in progress like everyone else. Yeah, but then it was quite, being brought up by 2 women primarily was quite emasculating. You know, my nan always told me to walk away from fights, which I did for the most part. I've only ever had 5 or 6 fights in my entire life, but the first time that I didn't, my response was completely disproportionate. And that was because I felt like such a prick for walking away all those other times, because I should have probably stood up for myself. And there is a lot to be said for walking away, and it's a weird thing. Listen, people, not just women, but people want you to be whatever they need you to be at any given time, and that's an incredibly hard person to be, right? So a woman wants you to be sensitive until someone slaps their ass, and then you better have the fucking man in you to look after him. It's, you know, it's an incredibly hard position to be as a bloke, but then also they don't want you to be overly aggressive and attack everyone that even looks at them. It's quite complicated. there is a balance to be found, because the one thing that you don't want is someone with a chip on their shoulder that, you know, becomes successful and then all they say is, yeah, and you know, you should respect me more because I'm working class. No, you should. I mean, don't get me wrong, people should understand that it's almost impossible to break that ceiling, because there are ceilings set in place, and it is very, very difficult, and social mobility is getting worse and worse and worse. But you don't also want, it's so weird, because I hear about people who are working class, like I couldn't believe Gordon Ramsay was working class, or that he came from Scotland, because he doesn't have his accent and he doesn't present himself as a very working class person, but when you meet him you become very aware of his working class work ethic and his morals. So it's weird. How do you one, get more working class people inspired enough and willing enough to take the risk? Because I think the thing with the working class is that there's no safety net. And that's the thing that everyone else is afforded, right? If you can try something, make a mistake, and still have a chance at something else. Whereas if you have no safety net, you have no family or financial support, and you try something and you mess up, you're probably going to end up in quite a bad place. And that's part of the reason there's a lack of representation of the working class in the crafts. And it's not just, I think the sad thing about it is people, you know, they see the person in front of the camera, they see the person that's holding the microphone, they don't see the person behind the camera and realise that that person actually has a better chance at longevity and having a much longer working career than someone like me, who's a rap artist who has potentially a very short lifespan, because I make 2 dud records and no one's going to bother with me anymore. Yeah, I make a dud TV programme and I'm on Big Brother, trying to pay my tax bill. I do feel those anxieties, but I think that again comes back to having no safety net or support. That's working class anxiety, because people go, "You're not working class anymore." I just laugh. I'm like, you don't know how my head works. You don't know the anxieties I have. You don't know. Listen, you can go and talk to a therapist all you want, but you can never quite undo everything that was hardwired when you were a child, because certain things were. And the worries that I saw and the stresses that I saw my nan go through, you know, electricity and gas getting cut off, where's the next pound going to come from, how am I going to get by? Those sorts of things don't leave you. They don't. And I'm in a better place now. I can afford to pay my mortgage every month, but I've got a bloody huge mortgage. You know, interest rates go up, I'm fucked. That's the practicalities of life. Like, people just think, I'm not even allowed to complain about a parking ticket on Instagram because I've got the money to pay it. So why would is that where I want to put that 60 quid? And ultimately it's 120, because I always fucking forget to pay them. So it's like, would I rather have not done something better with that money, you know? And then you campaign for the homeless. Well, why don't you put them in your house? It's a deflection. You know, there's a government in place that should be sorting these issues out. You look at what the face of knife crime is now, right? We have a knife crime epidemic, apparently. As far as I know, it's always been going on. Since I was growing up, it was always happening. I saw someone get, you know, one of my older friends was stabbed when I think I was 10, Jamal was 8. My little mate Jamal was he would run to the phone box. Jamal would later be stabbed himself. I've been stabbed. Stabbings happen, yeah? But the face of it being young, black youth tells you there's a racial motivation behind it, because actually the knife crime capital of the UK is Glasgow. And as far as I know, it always has been. So the problem isn't race, it isn't a culture here, it's poverty. You know, there's a reason it doesn't happen amongst the middle class. There's a reason middle class kids are not having postcode wars. It's because it's weird, right? Those things become important when you have sweet fuck all. You know, you identify with your postcode and your area when you have nothing else. But you have to find some kind of identity and purpose. That's when those things become important. Whereas you talk to someone from an upper class family and they've always just been expected to go to school, so they refer to, you know, part of their identity becomes where they went to school, which is completely different, because education is expected, it's encouraged. In my family, I was never expected to go to university. I was expected to leave school and get a job as early as I could, even though I was a bright child and I had a chance to go to and sit the entrance exam for the St Paul's Academy. I said to my nan I didn't want to do it. She said, okay. She still made me go to a bloody school I didn't want to go to, but it just, I think, there's so many, it's so multifaceted, you know, but like when the welfare state was brought in, it was to help, but you've had a lot of generations now, families where kids haven't seen their parents work. And where do you know, initially, where do you take your inspiration from on how to live life? You look at your parents, right? So there's a lot of people who have grown up with no work ethic. I was the opposite. I saw my nan working her arse off, you know, literally getting on her hands and knees and cleaning. I never went to school much, so I would go to the Strand with her and help her clean the banks in the mornings. I was given work ethic. That's disappeared in a lot of places. In some places, there just are no jobs. Some towns have nothing. There's different problems everywhere, and I was quite ignorant to it until I started travelling the country, you know, to film the documentaries, to realise that different people had different problems. But, you know, I've got two friends, Damien and Andre, who grew up in Colchester, and they're both mixed race, and they were pretty much the only... Funny that they would refer to themselves as black, but they were the only two black, as they would say it, they were the only two black kids in their school, and they had to fight their whole way through school because of that. I was the only white kid in my class and never had to defend myself for my race and was never made to feel uncomfortable. So what does that tell you? Pride is, I'm not a religious man, but in the Bible is listed as a sin, I believe. Pride can cause a lot of problems. You know, it gets people into situations that they never otherwise would have been. So when I got stabbed, I'd apparently barred someone. I hadn't. I said, excuse me, and moved past, which is why I refused to when I was told to shake the guy's hand and say sorry. And the guy it wasn't the guy who I'd apparently barged, it was the person who'd ended up stabbing me. The other guy was just looking at the floor, and I said, what? I didn't barge him. I said, excuse me. He said, shake his fucking hand and say sorry. And sorry. And this is probably where the machismo comes into it. And I said, don't fucking tell me what to do. And then he got right in my face and said, what, you think you're the baddest boy in here? What, you're the baddest? And with the bees, he spits coming out his mouth, and he's just close to my face. So I grabbed the back of his collar and I nutted him, not hard enough to put him down, but I just pushed him and went, what, my head's harder than yours? That's very macho behaviour, and probably completely unnecessary. As an adult, I would have probably just gone, all right, mate, sorry, you know what I mean? But it's something you learn. As a kid, you don't know what being a man is yet. Do I know what being a man is now? It feels like it's ever evolving. It really does, and I think it's a different thing for different people. And going back to what we spoke about earlier about people needing from you what they need from you at any given time, like, I'm not the best at DIY. Is that effeminate? Does that make me, do you know what I mean? We have all these weirdly, like, I don't know, gender-specific stereotypes, didn't we? What is being a man? I was born a boy, I grew into a man, I guess. What type of man am I? I don't know. You'd have to ask someone else. When I guess anxiety is a type of sickness, but I just I never knew what anxiety was until later on in life, and I was like, shit. That whole time it was restrictive, you know, all the days I had off school because I was like, man, I've got a bellyache, I can't go to school. It was something scared of life. Flip side of that is and even though I did this, I'm still affected by the anxiety because I'm making decisions to push myself based on being anxious. So I still don't know if I'm making a decision that I would make had I not have had that knot in my stomach. But I push myself. I put myself in uncomfortable situations and I deal with it. And I think, I don't know, everyone's wired differently. But sometimes you do just have to fucking deal with shit, to be honest with you. Like, we can all be anxious, we can all be depressed, but sometimes you have to take it upon yourself to do something about it. The scary thing about using your anxiety and anything negative that's gone in your life and using it to fuel the fire for you to do something that you want to do, if that's where you find your energy, it's bloody dangerous. So I've used the negatives in my life to drive a lot of positives, and a lot of good has come from that. And I've shared a lot of negative experiences from which a lot of good has come, which is bittersweet, because the only reason it's affected people is because they've been affected as well. But what's really scary about that, and I think anyone in my position will tell you this, is that there's a red button, and it's a self-destruct, and it's always just sitting there. Because if you feel like you don't have that inspiration, or you don't have that drive, or you don't have that motivation, you feel like it is a disease, it is a sickness, because you feel like you need, that's what I need, so you go looking for it, and you become, and it's that thing of like, if you look at, if you use relationships for an example, the same thing keeps on happening in a relationship, and the relationship keeps ending. You have to take a second and think, wait a minute, maybe this isn't the people I'm dating, or maybe it's the choices of, maybe it is who you're dating, but maybe it's who you're choosing to date, or maybe it's a behaviour of yours that's causing that problem. And you have to look at why you keep, at some point, pressing that red button. And it's really difficult not to. Things have been really good for me, and I've been at my least happy sometimes. I feel pretty good about everything at the moment, which is the first time in my life I've ever actually genuinely felt that. But it's still, it's still daunting. There's still days where I sit there and just wonder if it's going to come back. And that's the other thing. If I wake up with that knot in my stomach, I'm like, where's that gone? And then you start worrying about why you're not anxious. And then obviously that just becomes a self-perpetuating cycle, because what happens when you start worrying, you become anxious, and it's like, oh, there we are, it's back again, I know it. How's it going? I've got that familiar feeling again. So it's good. It is a good thing it can be a driving force. It's why some people succeed, it's why some people fail, because on the other side of it, a lot of people don't like that feeling, a lot of people don't like that insecurity or instability, and they end up just taking things. A lot of people do both. A lot of people succeed and still take things to numb it. And with drugs, it's weird. I think if you enhance, all well and good, but if you escape, then there's a problem. Frazzled. I'm writing loads of music, which is good, which my manager would tell you means I'm in a very good place. I'm writing a hell of a lot of music, good music, because the record label are happy. Not that they actually know what a good song is, but because they're a record label, right? But only joking. But my friends like the records too, which is good, as do my peers. So I'm writing loads and loads of music, but I'm also coming up with loads of other ideas. There's so much stuff going on. Weirdly, done a friend a favour and played a dodgy copper in a film a couple of days ago, which I really enjoyed. Acting would then be something else to take on top of making more documentaries. The research for the next documentary is motoring on, and there's more ideas for more documentaries, which means I've got to try and fit that. I've got, between now and the end of 2019, pretty much planned out without all the stuff that's going to pop up in between, which is good. I like organisation. I'm a little bit OCD, which is quite typical of someone with anxiety. Yeah, if I clean, I'm sorting my head out, not my house. You should see me in a pair of marigolds. But yeah, just loads. So we start releasing from May, and from then on we've got a plan to the end of the year with music. That will continue into the new year. A headline show. I haven't done a headline London show in a little while. So we're going to underplay and do a smaller venue than we normally would, and just do one this side of Christmas after we've released the singles that we're putting out this year. Tour next year, festivals. And then a big tour at the end of the year, and in between that somehow try and film another 2 documentaries.